acceptable to all and sundry. But it certainly shows that the state interrogated and entertained a methodology over the next couple of days to allow ADS and Thompson to get down to a price, which I think is important to say is 700 million rand more than the ceiling price.
Was that the small point you wanted to make just before the adjournment?
Yes, for me that's a very small point.
Can we now go to your statement at paragraph 231, where you deal with the evaluation that was performed by the technical assessment team of the what you refer to as the various or respective merits of CCII systems, IMS, and the Detexas system, which you deal with as from paragraph 231 of your statement to the end of 237 of your statement, also with the assistance of your DT 10456, which is our RMY 41, and that appears in file 3 of the bundles as from page 995. Now, page 995 is a document entitled Technical Evaluation of the Detexas Bus, Report on the Daiketo Bus Proposed for the SAN of Project Citron. Do you have the document?
Yes, I do.
Right. Your statement deals with some of the issues that arise from there. Could you take us through that?
Okay. I'm just mulling over whether to address my witness statement and the document, because, of course, my witness statement traverses much of what the document does. But anyway, as I've said by way of introduction, as I've said before, by this stage, the BAFOs, the best and final offers, are not including the IMS anymore. The offer baseline has changed as far back as the 24th of May, but only by replacing the baseline IMS with this brand new entity, the Diacerto databus from Detexas. So only on the 3rd and 4th of June, which is sort of more or less a week to two later, is the first time that Arms Corps and the DOD and the Navy actually get to grips with what is being offered here by way of replacement. Okay, so the technical assessment was undertaken on the instructions of the project executive, that is Captain Carmen and the program manager, Fritz Norkie of Arms Corps. And there was a small team representing, let's say it's the Department of Defense, which includes the Navy, but the Navy, at least uniformed Navy officers, were Captain Heinrich, or Nick Marais, then Commander Ian Egan-Fowler, who was the project engineer, and Lieutenant Commander Andrew Cottle was the more junior, I think he was the combat suite project engineer, and Commander Captain Marais was actually a communications specialist, and that's why he was called in to this little group to assist. Arms Corps was represented by the combat suite program manager, they call it acquisition manager, and from the preferred supplier at this stage, German Frigate Consortium, they called in a combat suite specialist, Dr. Wolfgang Vogel, who was the manager of their combat system department. Also represented were de Texas. Hopefully my pronunciation of their names will be more correct. Jean-Marc Ferrer and Laurent Royer were present. If I may quickly switch to the document itself, it talks about ADS were represented by Mr. Kevin O'Neill, Athol McLean, and Dave Horn, who were all system engineers, and in fact Dave Horn is a software engineer, a software specialist. So a point I can make at this stage, quite a lot of people were there, but we never even knew about this. In fact, I never even knew about this happening until at least a year or two later. I'm not sure exactly when, but it was long afterwards. So we were certainly never given any opportunity of stating our position. Of course, de Texas were able to state their position in response to our IMS, but we were not given an opportunity of responding to how the de Texas databus at that stage did or didn't meet either the IMS requirements or the combat suite requirements. So certainly in terms of administrative justice or administrative action, that is a deficient process in my view.
Once the evaluation team had conducted the exercise of evaluating the two systems, it prepared a report in which certain findings were recorded. Could you take us through those?
That's indeed correct. I think my witness statement really just has a summary of it, which is hopefully correct for the record. But probably more appropriate at this stage is to actually look at the document itself.
You will see at page 995, which is page 1 of that document, at paragraph 1.4, it sets out the process that was followed. And if you turn the next page at 996, it has preliminary evaluation report. And then on the next page at 997, the following is recorded just about the middle of that page. In terms of the above points raised, it is also pertinent to list the problems foreseen with the current IMS-based architecture. And then further down, it says, from a technical point of view, the CS project team proposes that the current architecture based on the IMS be retained for the following reasons. Would you like to discuss these?
Yes, clearly that's the summary, and the reasons are those set out before. But basically, I think, as it says in the beginning, kind of a SWOT, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis is the traditional term for that. But basically, it's a kind of a comparative analysis, probably better described as a pros and cons rather than a SWOT. But nevertheless, it goes through the pros and cons of the various, the two different options. So if we're looking at the first point there, starting at 1, what is most interesting for me is that certainly the initial proposal from de Texas is to use normal copper in fact, even the twisted pair version of copper for the connection of this combat suite. And their recordal of the point that EMI and EMC, that means electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic compatibility problems, would be problematic. Now, I don't want to have to take you back there because it's getting slightly technical, but it's certainly relevant.
The part of the document you're reading appears at page 996 of the report. It is a discussion under preliminary evaluation report. Is that where you are?
That's correct, yes.
You can proceed.
Okay. We didn't traverse this when we went through the previous couple of letters, but certainly for the record, there is a recordal there that, as this document says out, Thomson has already said they will not be accepting any responsibility there. And if I may say so, as an expert in combat system integration, although I say so myself, this is a particularly risky point. We've been talking about risk. From a technical point of view, it is one of the riskiest things in the whole integration of any complex system, especially involving wires. And one of the reasons for the specification right at the beginning of fiber optics, and we went through that letter, I think probably on day one, the Project Diodon letter, where the program manager, Pierre Meyering, records Arms Corps' directive to the Chief of the Navy of the use of fiber optic systems, and therefore the technology FDDI, which the IMS used. Now here, the Texas is not even offering to use fiber optics, let alone FDDI. And of course, there were great, not only risk issues here alluded to in those previous letters, but cost issues as well, and responsibility issues. The next point is 2. It says that the LAN, that's a local area network, and implementation of the architecture is very simple and static. There's no automatic reconfiguration, and after 2 faults, the LAN can be considered to be down. Okay, that the reference to the terms very simple and static is certainly not in a positive light at all. The whole reasoning for this, if I may say so, sophisticated architecture of the IMS, it precisely catered for that it wasn't so simple and it wasn't static, it was dynamic. Now, unfortunately, having a dynamic system does add to complexity, but this is precisely what Arms Corps had instructed us to do. They'd said, we're going back now to 93, 94, design an IMS that nobody needs control over this. If a part of it fails, it reconfigures itself. It's not static, it's dynamic. And in fact, our network can actually, not in its entirety, it's called quadredundant, which means that you can actually have at least 3 and maybe 4 failures before there is an entire system failure. So this to Texas is certainly, in fact, I would say in most scenarios, one failure, not 2 failures. For sure, 100% for sure. If one of those SIFUs, which is part of the network, fails, this network has failed. That is for sure. But not only from a failure on board in the normal operation or battle damage, but the whole reason for the IMS and the combat suite is for upgrade and development and fit for but not with over the next at least 15 years of the life of the combat suite. And the IMS is designed so that you can add on or take out any subsystem without any other subsystem even needing to be told about it. So that's why it's dynamic. So that certainly is a major, let's say, the flaw is not so much the right word, but deficiency of the DeSoto bus compared to the IMS. Okay, our system, as I said, is based on the U.S. Navy's SafeNet standard, SafeNet 2, which uses FDDI, which is 100 megabits per second. Here, the existing system only was based on a very, very old version of Ethernet, the 10 megabit per second. That was definitely, if not 80s, even 70s. And to get it up to the same performance level as the IMS would have to be upgraded to 100 megabits per second. So it wasn't. Anyway, it's not so much that it couldn't be upgraded, but it didn't. It also showed that it had to go through development, whereas IMS had been there since 1993. And these DeSoto boxes, and this is hardware, do not yet exist. They need to be developed and qualified. I mean, that in itself applies money and risk. And timescale risk and money risk. Huge risk as far as the client, the state is concerned, is this issue of intellectual property and proprietary software. That was now, instead of the IMS had been developed specially for Project Diodon and future surface combatants, where all of the software would be owned, at least co-owned, but certainly owned in the country by Arms Corps. Here we've got proprietary software owned by a foreign country. That is a risk. I talked about political risk at one stage. That could be considered as a political risk. And certainly this reference to deterministic Ethernet also goes against the baseline. Let's call it the negotiation baseline, not so much the contract baseline, but the existing baseline is the IMS had to be based on COTS. That means commercial off-the-shelf technologies. So here we're having another divergence from a stipulated requirement, and the future implications of that, which reply not to acquisition risk, but long-term risk of ownership, rely heavily on the supplier for future support. And that, importantly, despite allegations to the contrary. So here they weren't even believing what Thompson and ADS were saying. And I certainly would support that point completely.
I see that on that page, and on the next page there are quite a whole number of technical deficiencies that you've pointed out. I suppose technicality is a matter that we do not follow that greatly, but with regard to the conclusions reached on these findings made, especially from a technical point of view, that appears at page 997. What conclusions and the basis of the conclusions were made in this regard?
Well, if I understand you correctly, the final conclusion is that the architecture based on the IMS is retained. I think that's the fundamental conclusion, if that's what you're referring to.
If I may ask you to turn to page 998, I think it's where you find the conclusion at paragraph 1.6.
Correct paragraph?
At paragraph 1.6, there's a heading conclusion there. You see that? This is after the listing of the technical aspects with regard to the CS project team that have proposed with regard to the architecture.
Confused me because I'm sitting around, my paragraphs are 241, unless I've jumped somewhere else.
1.6 of the document that you were reading.
Okay, sorry about that.
Have you found that page?
Yes.
Now, you would have seen that just before the conclusion, there are certain technical attributes that are recorded with regard to the IMS. These are referred to at paragraphs 239, 240, and 241 of your statement. But I'm interested in 1.6, which records the conclusion in the following terms. After the above report had been completed, it was provided to the project officer and program under cover of a memorandum. While the report clearly shows a preference for CCII option, it must be stated that the evaluation undertaken was purely of a technical nature, and that the technical potential of the CCII is preferred for all of the reasons listed in section 1.5. It continues to say that the Texas option was selected purely on financial constraints placed on the project. The risk, as determined by the main contractor, translated into financial penalties for the CCII option. The data bus is a critical subsystem to the overall performance of the combat suite of the Sand Patrol Corvette. As such, from a technical point of view, the main contractor has to assume the responsibility for ensuring that it works. And that's the end of that paragraph that deals with the conclusion. From what I see, in this conclusion, it does appear that from a technical perspective, the CCII option was the one preferred by the SA Navy. Is that correct?
That would appear so, yes, from this report.
And that preference would have come about as a result of the points listed as from 1 to 15 just above the paragraph dealing with the conclusion. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
That the Texas option, however, in terms of this conclusion, was selected purely, as this document says, on financial constraints placed on the project.
Yes.
The risk, as determined by the contractor, also translated to financial penalties for the option, for the CCII option. Well, I think this is what we talked about this morning. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this?
Yes. It's important also to know that this is the second version of this so-called report. In fact, the things that you've actually read out here, some of them at least, were added on to the version quite a lot later. I certainly can find it. I'm pretty sure in my discovery schedule, which is computerized, I can find it quite quickly. But these things were added on, it would seem, by at least the project executive at a later stage. In fact, it says the above report had been completed and it was provided to the project officer and program, I think they mean program manager, they've left out a word, under cover of a memorandum. So the original version of this actually doesn't refer, as far as I can remember, or certainly not, is to the added on post facto reasoning of the Dex's option being selected purely on financial constraints. Okay. The initial report was submitted not long after the meeting of the 3rd and 4th of June by the people who we mentioned at the beginning. And effectively, that report was effectively overridden by the project executive. I will say that it would seem to me is that the report itself was never tabled at the JPT, the Joint Project Team. It was just went to the project executive, being the project officer and the program manager, and it wasn't with the concurrence of the whole project team. Anyway, what was clearly overridden was the recommendation based in the first version of the report. This one came several weeks or several months later. I can find that out if I get questioned in detail on that. But more so is that the conclusion being based on financial constraints. And maybe I am being, what's the right word? Accused is not the right word I'm looking for, of belaboring the points of price and risk. But what I've tried to do this morning is go through the process of pricing and risking and the interrelationship to show that it was in polite terms, a patent process. It was concocted. It was not bona fide. It was basically negotiating from a point of strength on the part of ADS and Thompson because they were exclusive. It was non-competitive. We know that if there had been competition, other competitors not only could have, I know would have, and it wasn't only BAE. It was at least ST and Atlas and Celsius Tech, which is now part of, would have taken a different view to this about the risk of the IMS. So that's the thing of financial constraints. I think important here that it's not my wording here. It was selected on the issue of financial constraints. And I know not long before lunch we went down to the final arm wrestling and negotiation, and I know at the very end we were talking about reductions in price down to 2.634 billion, which was a special price offered by the mother company, and then another 35 million reduction. So we're talking about small amounts of money there, well, relatively small amounts of money. But in the greater scheme of things, of 2.6 billion, and the total amount of risk, of real risk, was actually the difference, well, not real risk. Even in ADS's terms, the difference between 48 million and 77 million, 30 million. That's not really financial constraints placed on the project when it had been allowed to jump from an adjusted project ceiling of 1.9 billion to 2.6 billion. That's not really and truly a financial constraint. I mean, if I may say so, what's the difference, the real difference, arithmetic difference or whatever, between a price of 2.599 and 2.620 to have include our risk provision? So I'm afraid to say that this thing selected purely on financial constraints placed on the project, and the risk as determined by the main contractor translating into financial penalties, is overstating it by a magnitude.
Now, if one has regard to the paragraphs following from 238, where you summarize the findings of the evaluation team and the conclusions reached, that goes right up to the end of paragraph 243 of your statement. Would that be correct? Just take a moment and see if so quite apart from what is set out in the document that we referred to and what is set out in your paragraphs of your statement up to paragraph 243, is there anything else you'd like to add, or we can move to the next matter?
No, I don't want to belabor the point too long, but I think it is fairly relevant to note that because it was, I think the chief author, there were two authors, was Lewis Matheson of Arms Corps and Ian Egan Fowler of the Naval Engineering Bureau. But I will say is that the notes that were taken were actually taken by Dr. Wolfgang Vogel, and I think I've discovered those. The notes, the handwritten notes were produced by him, and I think I've discovered those. But Lewis Matheson in later, I think at least in his Section 28, the transcript of Section 28 interview done by the JIT, has this document put in front of him, and he basically, say, supersedes what was said, and that is point 15. Now, that is both Thompson, and I'm quoting now, both Thompson and the GFC recognize that the IMS is a superior product. If I may say so myself, it is certainly a better product for all the reasons listed in this document. And I can tell you, having spoken to Dr. Vogel, I think he's retired now, that certainly was his unadulterated opinion as well. It's superior from so many aspects, but not only the technology aspects as set out here, but in terms of the future life of not only the Corvette Combat Suite, but the Corvette itself. It is superior. So I have to say that if it comes up that the person who wrote this thing, who penned it, who edited, Lewis Matheson, says, I think what he says is that, oh yes, this was written, but it was only hearsay, something like that. I'm saying, sorry, I don't accept that. This, as I've said, is the second iteration of the same report. And if it was hearsay, then it should have been removed from this version of the report. I've tried to stick with just this version. The later, slightly more, it was got slightly more content. But I do not believe, it's not my position that it was merely hearsay. I will say, as an expert, unless anybody challenges to me whether I'm an expert in databuses and combat suite integration using fiber optic based local area networks, that the IMS is definitely a superior product. And I'll also go on to say that the DoD and the Navy in particular have actually done themselves a disfavor by choosing a product that is inferior.
Now again, if one has regard to your statement as from paragraph 244 up to the end of that discussion at 249, you deal in those paragraphs with the findings as set out in the report, the evaluation report. Do you confirm that?
Yes, from what I can see in front of me.
Right. That would then bring us to what you refer to in your statement as the current view of AMSCO regarding the IMS on the one hand and the detectors on the other hand.
A very good point. But if I may just say, if under 244, we haven't really ventilated this properly. Because just remember, to present my evidence properly, I have to speak to the documents. I couldn't write, I just didn't have time to write every single word that I wanted to mention or to state in these proceedings in this document. It would have been 1,000 pages long, as you people are hearing now. But anyway, in the baseline, the technical baseline, which was proposed on, we can see, the 7th of April, I'm talking about my paragraph 244, the Navy stated in its letter of the 6th of May following that a hardwired solution is not acceptable to the SAN architecture as proposed on the 7th of April. Okay, obviously that's what they want. Okay, I'm not going to open the document there, but what I can say as an expert, and I know what the Texas bus consists of, and I know what the CMS consists of, and we've talked about the navigation distribution system, which was actually developed by my company. So my company and me involved on a day-to-day, week basis with that, is that unfortunately we actually talked about a hybrid process a couple of days ago, Friday. But let's call it not so much the Deserto databus, but the interconnectivity methodology, which is the databus, is not just Ethernet on board the frigates. It has an Ethernet component within it, but then it has some hardwired links. In fact, an Ethernet only connects, the local area network only connects the combat management system together. The systems to which is meant, the bus is meant to connect, are connected by what I mentioned the other day as SIFUs, the system interface units. So the combat management system connects via hardwired links to these SIFUs, these SIFUs, and they in turn connect to the subsystems. So there are two hardwired links there. Okay. But what's worse, from a system architecture and upgradability point of view, from a timing point of view, from every single perspective one can think of technically, is that even that topology wasn't sufficient to integrate the entire combat suite. I know because my navigation distribution system does it. There are about another 15 hardwired links keeping this system together, gluing this system together. And this morning I mentioned a small thing under the section of system of surface-to-surface missile and the MEPS and the combat management system. And I know that one of the links that we had to add in, especially after we had negotiated the baseline for the navigation distribution system, is a special hardwired link to the surface-to-surface missile. There are more of them. I think there are 15 altogether. So this imperative here, which I would have thought was a baseline, non-negotiable imperative of a hardwired solution is not acceptable to the SAN, in terms of expediency, was just dispensed with. And there are a multitude of hardwired links in the system that is on board the frigates or the patrol corvettes to this day as we are speaking right now.
Perhaps just before we get to the current view of ARMSCOP, my attention was just drawn to one document that you sought to rely on, which is your DT10321, our RMY 42, which this is at the end of paragraph 241.2. There is an internal memorandum. This is a document at page 1006 of our papers. It's an internal memorandum I think it's it's on the letterhead of African's defense system. Just let me know if you have the document before you. Is there something you need to point out just quickly with regard to that document?
Unfortunately, I can't do it quickly.
Yes, you can deal with it then.
Okay, I must do so. All right, it is a document written by ADS. It's got an extremely interesting date on it, the 16th of December 1998. The reason why it's interesting, also important, because everybody who's old enough to know will know that used to be a public holiday, and in fact I think it still is. But anyway, what's quite interesting is the subject line, which says meeting between Duncan Howells, D.N. Howells, Kevin Casey O'Neill, and J.E.G. Carmerman. In any case, it's interesting and actually relevant from a number of perspectives. This point of hardwired links, which is hopefully why this was pointed out to me, is one of certainly the relevant point in this context, but there are others. Okay, as the document says, the meeting was requested by ADS in order to find out, in brackets, informally, directly from the SAN, what their position was on the question of combat suite architecture, with particular reference to the proposed data bus and the possible use of hardwired links between the trackers and weapons. Now, the date, of course, here is particularly important. As I've mentioned this morning, the Texas data bus only becoming sort of onto the radar semi-formally was in April of 1999, where that one spreadsheet I showed and referred to has a place for the Texas data bus. But I think that this is graphic proof of the data bus, the IMS being worked out. I'm not quite sure whether I come to the other document by the Frenchman Olivier Boussier, who refers to, I think maybe we've done that one, refers to the BAE SEMA architecture protecting the bus of C squared I squared. Surely, no, this is a follow-on from that. Now, I think I've marked the section there which says informally, directly from SAN. Now, the word informally is fairly indicative of what was happening here, because at this stage, on the 16th of December, the German frigate consortium had already been appointed by the state, let's call it the government, as the preferred supplier. Okay? Right, so now the state is going into a negotiation phase with the preferred supplier. The preferred supplier itself has indicated that its combat suite supplier is going to be ADS, which is who's written this document. Okay, in fact, they get elevated, as we know, to the same level as the GFC. So, in my view, there was no provision in the MODAC scheme of things for informal discussions of any nature whatsoever between the joint project team or the integrated project team as existed at this stage, especially Johnny Carmerman, Captain Carmerman, of having a private meeting with Duncan Howells and Kevin O'Neill, especially in order to gauge not their position, but the SAN's position, its position, with request to the combat suite architecture. So that in itself is something of particular importance. But of course, they were treading on hallowed ground here. If I may say treading, they were trespassing on hallowed ground, because this is the baseline. The baseline existed at this stage, a data bus, which was the proposed one, which was the IMS. As we can see from what we've just traversed, only at the end of May did the Texas data bus suddenly pop right onto the radar screen, and the IMS one popped right off it. But only after this meeting of the 3rd and 4th of June 1999. Here we're going back 6 months before. But nevertheless, they're asking the question about hardwired links. Now, this is a very technical thing of the whys and wherefores, but it's clear that hardwired links were taboo, and yet, as I've just said, is that that's effectively what the final architecture and technology involve, a multitude of hardwired links. I'm just gathering my own wits about me here.
In the next page, perhaps if that would not be taking you too far ahead of time, there is a discussion at page 1007. At paragraph 2, it says baseline/URS. Is that a matter of interest that you want to talk about?
There's a whole lot of interesting things here, but if we just go back, we can see the context is they refer to an emotional response. There's no emotion in MODAC, even in 147. So I think that this is a pretty graphic illustration of the actual acquisition procedures, the points of contact that were being used, the basis of, as I mentioned the other day, the presentation to the chiefs of staff and the hot reaction. That's an emotional reaction. And here we have more of the same, the emotional response of our planned approach. They go on the two difficulties that still remain to be dealt with. And I think this probably goes to a lot of what I've been saying. It also goes to the chairperson's point about the meeting of the minds of the contractor and the nominated contractor. You can see graphically in the normal written form of the English is that the baseline says, and quoting, the other is that SafeNet 2 standard is identified in the URS, whereas we do not plan to use it. This should not be a major issue, since it is not a critical primary requirement, but we will have to manage it. So it shows that even at this early stage, where they've assumed the mantle of Combat Suite integrator, they were actually only playing games with us. They were, all of those nonsensical things, the requests for offer, there were 4 of them out there, and all the time and the effort we took to providing those best and final offers for the IMS with all of its ancillary stuff, they were just playing games with it. Because as soon as the opportunity arose, they were going to use emotional responses and hot reactions and the feedback of their friend CS, whoever that might be, to get feedback from the chiefs of staff. But here it is in graphical writing of a document that probably nobody other than them ever thought would see the light of day.
At paragraph 6 of that document, still on that same page 1007, dealing with competition, there is the last sentence there where it says there is evidence that the SA Navy and AMSCO are getting fed up with C2I2 for their behavior. Are you aware of what this was about?
Oh yes, indeed, and I'm pretty sure that this letter will come up again in the discussions around the point I've mentioned a couple of times of British Aerospace C2R2 and Telemet. Certainly here is an absolute graphic illustration of ADS being on the inside track, where they would have got out of the MODAC or even the 147 scheme of things to find out that the project team is very annoyed about the proposed competition of British Aerospace C2R2 and Telemat. But anyway, that's another theme of my witness statement and my evidence in general, which we will come to. But it certainly is an indication of ADS being illicitly, if I may use a polite term, being on this inside track and getting information from people like Johnny's contact with Bill Reela. If I may say so, just as a taster, there is no place whatsoever for the project team, whether it's joint or otherwise, for getting annoyed for competition, because competition is prescribed by the Constitution. We're talking about 98 here. The Constitution that I know of prescribed a system of acquisition or procurement that included a prescript of competitiveness and transparency, of course, and fairness and other things as well. That doesn't include annoyance by a project team. In fact, more so adding grist to my mill is a document written after this, but long before the election of the Diacerto bus and the deselection of the IMS, which is from the Chief Executive Officer of Arms Corps, actually instructing the GFC to go out for alternative sources of supply. That is competition. And there are plenty other references to that competitive element, including from Chippy Shake as well. When we come to that particular point under conflict of interest, we will show that the French themselves were instructed by Chippy Shake that ADS and Thompson no longer have this elevated position, because Thompson is now buying ADS, and therefore they no longer have this position of being nominated because of a sea change in the reality on the ground.
Just above that, a couple of paragraphs above, there is a discussion on price, where they talk about Johnny is still recycling a perceived pool of unpermitted funding. Are you aware what that was about?
Yes, I actually was aware, but not quite in this context, but they related to the same thing. At one stage, I was actually advised that maybe the risks that were being added on to the IMS price, which, as we know, was a couple of tens of millions, could be funded for this very same reason, is that the 6,001, which had been the absolute non-negotiable ceiling price, could be increased because of this uncommitted funding that would allow to be added on to the 6,000. So the answer is yes, I was aware of something like this, but I wasn't aware of it also being the basis of how the 6,001 could be escalated to 6,873, which is the final price.
Is there anything else you need to add with regard to this document before we get to the discussion of the current view regarding the data bus?
Yeah, maybe this is the right time to do it. I think it's almost the very last paragraph. It looks like 2, and it says C2I2. Also,
is that the paragraph under the heading Proposed Actions, which is on the last page of that document, page 1008?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, you can take us through that.
Made the statement that ADS were just playing games with us, and to emphasize that, see what they say here, is inform them that we are not interested in their proposed version of the MOU unless it specifically excludes any interaction with combat suite or combat management system suppliers in the competition with us. Continue to engage with them in proposal preparation, but with no special status. I think that is a fairly polite way of playing games. If they had no interest, they should rather have put us out of our misery right there and then. But their proposed version of the MOU, I need to address that. Sure, we did have a version, but we didn't initiate that. They actually sent us an MOU to say that if we sign up to this MOU, then we will be included in the baseline, in the technical and the contractual and whatever baseline, IMS would be there. But unfortunately, I knew what was brewing because of the BAE SEMA issue, because that had actually been brewing, which when I come to it, had been brewing since 1997. And various companies, including BAE and SDN Atlas and Celsius Tech, had all been in contact with us, and they wanted our IMS. So it was extremely difficult at an early stage to commit myself to exclusivity with ADS, because just think of it. Imagine if I'd committed myself to exclusivity, but through normal competitive process, BAE from the UK, or SDN Atlas from Germany, or Celsius Tech from Sweden had actually won this thing, either directly or through their very close contacts with the German Frigate Consortium, who in fact are the GFC's traditional suppliers for combat suites. It's not Thomson. It's Celsius Tech and certainly these days Celsius Tech and the other German company. So we could have excluded ourselves by signing an exclusivity arrangement with ADS. So it just didn't make sense. So I had to include in my proposed version of the MOU that once a preferred supplier for the combat suite gets, then I will sign exclusivity. But they threw their toys out the cot. And when I said that, they effectively did what they did here is, they just didn't go forward with the MOU at that stage. Which is fair enough if they put us out of our misery. But I don't think what I like very much what I read in the last sentence is to continue to engage with them in proposal preparation, waste our time and energy and money, but with no special status.
Now, having dealt with all of those findings and by the evaluating team when they compared the data bus from the C squared, I squared, and the one proposed by Thomson, certain conclusions were reached. You did not participate in that IMS, but we do know that in the current project, certain views are held about what sort of data bus is required. How did you become aware of that?
Okay, unfortunately it's not quite a current project yet. It's a current project in terms of acquisition. But it's a project that was initiated formally by Arms Corps Procurement Secretariat, I think on the 8th of June, might be 8th of July last year. I see the tender date has just been extended in the last couple of days till June this year. So I'm just emphasizing the point. It is a current in terms of acquisition. But we are fortunately for me, still surviving as a company, and we are a formal, at least aspirant, I will call it, at level 4, the combat suite level, and we are registered with Arms Corps as being an interested bidder or tenderer, not directly to Arms Corps because they are tendering at the shipyard level, but having registered, we receive correspondence from them, let's say, on a sort of like an hourly basis. But a document that I received, and of course unsolicited, other than in respect of just being a registered aspirant, was from Arms Corps Procurement Secretariat, and I have that. I've just opened that in front of me, and as we can see, I think it's an email. That's the way they communicate these days.
That document is an email from Procurement Secretariat dated 21 August 2014, which was sent at 03:04 p.m. It is referred to in the bundles as RMY 43. It appears at page 1009. Yes, you can proceed, Doctor.
Okay, it's not signed, but it is sent electronically on behalf of Senior Management Procurement Secretariat. And if we go back now to the very beginning, as you mentioned all the relevant things, I'm looking at they do specifically address what they call a command and surveillance databus, which is stipulated in the specification, the baseline for this vessel. It's called a hydrographic survey vessel, which is being acquired under Project Hotel, one of the newest projects in the Navy. Anyway, that is a matter of introduction to the point that I wanted to make, which is I have paraphrased, hopefully correctly, with regarding it's basically their response to another contender who's wanting to make an offer for the combat suite, and the joint response, and I know that the responses come jointly from the technical responses, might be in the name of the Arms Corps Procurement Secretariat, but the technical responses come from the project team of Arms Corps and the Navy, and their response is that it is to be emphasized that it is not foreseen that a SAN, South African Navy frigate-type database solution, will be implemented on board the HSV, that's the hydrographic survey vessel. What I've emphasized in bold there is this particular system can be regarded as being obsolete and is certainly not considered to be a cost-effective solution, as any competent level 4 system integrator will attest to.
The passage that you read from, is that the one coming from, I think it's the second page of that document, which is at the top of page 1010.
That's correct, yes. Sorry, I need to say for the fullness of the point, and not necessarily just to add grist to the mill, and that is we are only now in 2015. These frigates got taken into service in 2005, so that's 10 years ago. They're not even close to their half-life upgrade, and not even that close to the major upgrade of even the combat suite. So if this is a valid position now, and it's already obsolete, it emphasizes the point I was trying to make when we were ventilating or addressing the Detexis report. It's the long term where the problems. A database is a database is a database at the beginning. At the beginning, you can put the whole thing together with chewing gum if it'll work, but that's not the point. It might work for the beginning, it might work for 5 years, whatever. It might even work while you've got those existing subsystems on board. But if you're thinking about the long-term obsolescence management, adding on fit for but not with systems, that is when the problem arises. That was why the IMS was designed the way it was designed.
And you say the statement is an indictment of the Texas database?
Yes, indeed, because it's the Texas databus that is sitting on board those 4 frigates. I think 3 of them are in Simonstown, and one of them is probably outside the De Hoop Nature Reserve on maneuvers with the German Navy as we speak.
Now, that then brings us to a discussion relating to the Corvette Combat Suite System selection. That appears as from page 25, paragraph 252 of your statement. Have you found it?
I'm on 252 of my statement, yes.
Yeah, and coupled with paragraph 252 of your statement is the document you referred to, number 0489, which we have referred to previously. It is our RMY 10. Now, RMY 10 is in file 1 at page 131. Now you'll see that this was a notification to GFC of the decision regarding supplier selections that were made by the PCB, right?
That's correct, yes.
And you point out in paragraph 253 that the letter did not state that any selection had as yet been made in respect of the data bus.
That's also correct.
You mention also the price allocated by GFC and IDS in respect of the IMS offer of May 1999. Would you like to take it from there?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that one. Did you say the IPMS?
No. I'm talking about what you refer to in paragraph 254 of the price allocated by GFC and ADS to the IMS and the offer of May 1999. Would you like to take it from there?
Yes, I think we've already addressed that point previously. I'm not sure quite how this letter helps me with respect to that point.
Now, I do notice that if one has regard to the paragraphs following there, you have dealt in your evidence with regard to the reclassification of the data bus as a category B system and the replacement of CCII systems with the Texas system. Is there anything else that you need to add?
Yes, I certainly do want to address that letter a little bit more, but I think that we effectively coming to the next theme, which is final contract, after my point to paragraph 260 in my witness statement.
Right. Would you like to address that now?
I just want to. I think we've gone through most of that, but I think what I've said under 259, because I've basically addressed the process, and if we're mindful of the formal processes of defence acquisitions in terms of MODAC or otherwise, I think that it is fair to say that none of the minutes of any of the bodies show that they considered any of the matters regarding the IMS either properly or at all.
And just before we conclude on that section, you mentioned in paragraph 257 that Sheikh Kanaman, Swan, and Norkia, who participated in the decision making, did so despite them having had knowledge of the Texas database report and conclusions of the evaluation team. What do you make of that?
That's an important point. I mean, of course, Kanaman and Norkia commissioned the reports, so they would know of it. I'm working a little bit from memory now, but I'm pretty sure that the evidence in the last 15 years indicates that Sheikh and Swan were also aware of it, and that these are chiefs of service, Sheikh being the chief of acquisitions, and Lou Swan, being the chief executive officer of Arms Corps. What I should have said is when we were talking about the Texas report, I did say that the report, which was commissioned at a subset of the JPT, Joint Project Team, was never put to the project team. But be that as it may, far, far more importantly, the team, the body that actually ended up making the decisions, as we've just seen, the document in front of us, is the Project Control Board made decisions. I will say at this point it made decisions. Unfortunately, I think in terms of MODAC, the PCB should not have existed. Also, I will know now, many years later, that the PCB was not actually a decision-making body. It was never formulated to do so, but nevertheless, it did make decisions. But be that as it may, the process that was followed, the PCB was the decision-making body because it had the requisite, say, technical knowledge and experience to do so. Certainly, the level above it, the next entity above it was the Strategic Office Committee, or equal higher up. They certainly didn't have the capability of making these type of decisions. But the Texas report was never served in either of its forms, the first or second, was never served in front of that committee. It was kept to the project executive. So even the good points, being a superior thing, and the negative points could never have been known by the Project Control Board in order to make a properly informed decision.
I guess the process unfolded to after the evaluation of the subsystems and the eventual decisions taken, that brought the entire process to the conclusion or the signing of the final contracts on or about 1 December 1999 as approved by Cabinet. You deal with that as from paragraph 261 of your statement, and with regard to the budgets approved by Cabinet. I must just pause to mention that some of this evidence is before the Commission. Is there anything else you want to add?
Yes, unfortunately, I have to finish addressing the letter, which is probably sufficient for this thing, but it leads into others, and it's better to address it right now. No particular order. As we've talked about before, the letter is entitled Project Control Board Decisions. And we've talked about the minutes of the decision-making Project Control Board. Now, in the greater scheme of things, members of the government, and we're coming to that point you've just mentioned now, are on the record many times that the government is not involved itself in subcontracts. It's just all over the place, whether it's said by Minister Lakota or Irwin or whatever. But here we have documentary proof that the state did make all of these decisions. In respect of the Corvette, we've got the decisions made for the Corvette platform. And that's why I want to address this letter, at least the second part of it. In the terms of the combat suite, it was the states that made the decisions. They did the evaluations. whether it was the surface-to-surface missile, or whether it was the IMS. It was the joint project team that made the recommendations. It was the project control board that ratified those decisions or made them and passed those up to the higher level bodies. As far as my view, I certainly see a deviation from MODAC here, because I cannot see the decisions being passed up through to the AACB, and the AASB and the AAC. I cannot see that. I think it seems to me that these decisions basically went straight to MINCOM. But if I may just address what I've said I want to do. In the tables attached, there's the combat suite, and as I've said before, I wasn't quite sure whether it appeared in the table, and this is a reminder why I'm using documents. Not too far down, I have highlighted it in a block, and the combat management system does appear there, with the supplier being ADM.
I beg your pardon and apologize for interjecting. Are you still referring to the document at RMY10? That is the letter of the project with the heading Project Control Board Decisions regarding the Project Citron Technical Baseline, to which is attached several schedules.
Indeed, that's a letter from Loose One.
All right, that's at page 131, right?
I'm not going to spend too long on this. I just wanted to point out that the CMS from ADS, African Defence Systems, Thompson, is selected in terms of this letter.
It would assist us if you read out the names in full rather than use the acronyms. We still have not familiarized ourselves with these acronyms.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, about under element and supplier in the top, the heading of that table, we have under element combat management system, and we have the supplier as African Defence Systems. As I've mentioned before, effectively this was the 335 million rand system from Thompson, CSF being the Tavitec NT system, being modified by African Defence Systems. To point out things that don't exist, but I'll try to do so. Nowhere there will you see the IMS. Whether it's the one from C-squared, R-squared, or whether it's the one from Detexis, you won't see it, and that is a clear indication that the IMS was no longer a level 4 system, because it was no longer a level 3 system. It was integrated into the combat management system. So the Detect system is now level 2. It's integrated into the combat management system, and that why it doesn't need to be addressed by this table of selections. We go to the next page, starting with ship platform, and to emphasize my point that every single element on the entire Corvette combat suite, as well as ship platform, were selections of the state done by the DA point for another theme called the IPMS simulator. But as we see there, unless my eyes are deceiving me, the last point is the IPMS simulator is a subsystem, and it is allocated to a company called, I'll try and be exact, C212. They probably meant C2I2 or C squared I squared or CCII Systems Pty Limited.
Right. If you turn the page to page 134, it says selected product and suppliers ship platform, and then it says combat suite. Page 134.
Correct, I can see that.
Is there anything you need to add on that?
No, it's maybe an observation at this point. Is it's something I do address, and maybe this is a graphical. In terms of the overseas, we've talked about the foreign procured items, the FPRs. The previous table were the items either local or where there wasn't competition. As we know, there was competition in respect of all of the foreign procured items. But what is certainly noteworthy is in each and every instance there was, in most instances, three-way competition, at least two-way competition. But in every single instance, a French company won that competition. And as far as my memory is correct, even Aerospatiale has got Thomson CSF shareholding in it. It might not be a huge amount or even a controlling amount, but I think it's something like 10%. But if you look above the word Aerospatiale, you'll see the word Thomson, Thomson, and Thomson. So it's just a documentary indication of a point I wish to make.
So it does appear from the point you make that the indigenization of the combat suite just fell out of the window.
No, unfortunately, it's not what I want to argue with my evidence leader, but the foreign procured items were always foreign procured. Originally in Citron Phase 1 or Round 1, what was called here the surveillance and target acquisition radar was going to be actually uplifted from the strike craft. But effectively, none of these technologies really existed in this country, and in terms of the Defence Review, none of them were considered as critical indigenous technologies or capabilities. So it actually was quite fair in my own expert view. I'm only saying that as a joke, because I'm not an expert in in all of these things. That it was reasonable in fact, it wasn't only reasonable, there was no alternative but to acquire these systems from overseas. What I'm saying is interesting. They all acquired from France, and they all acquired effectively from either the same company or the last company, Aerospatiale, has a shareholding in Aerospatiale.
Thank you. We done with the final contract? Or is there anything you need to add with regard to the conclusion of the final contract?
A very small point. It's the Cabinet made the decision on the 1st of December, but we do come to it. I don't want to be the record to reflect something wrong. The contracts, the umbrella agreements, were signed after Cabinet approval on the 1st, and they were signed on a huge day, the 3rd of December. Possibly what I can say, I've alluded to before, it was not the German frigate consortium that signed the umbrella agreement. It was a company, not a company, it was a party called ESAC, here in my paragraph 262, which stands for European South African Corvette Consortium, and it comprised of the three companies making up the German frigate consortium, but they signed individually as Blom and Voss. I'm not even going to try HDW, Hawalten Deutsche Werken. Please excuse my pronunciation, I'm not German. Thyssen, Rheinstahl Technique, African Defence Systems, and Thomson CSF. They all signed individually with various members of representing the South African government.
You then make reference to the budget approved by Cabinet for the acquisition of the corvettes.
That's correct. Under my 2.63, the contract price was signed at 6.873 billion, as opposed to the 6.001 billion that was the ceiling price in December 1998. Okay, when I say that, it might have been derived from a combination of prices. I think we know from platform price in December 98 and combat suite price December 98, platform prices in April 98, and the combat suite price was signed as 2.599 billion, which is a simple increase of 699 million as against the increased allocation ceiling price of the original combat suite allocation ceiling price of 1.47, which by December 98 had increased to 1.9 billion.
When you say in paragraph 264 of your statement that the budget approved by Cabinet made provision for the use of the Detexis system rather than CCII system, IMS, what do you seek to convey by that?
Nothing in particular. I just think that's probably it would have been expressed better that the baseline at that stage, the signing supply umbrella agreement supply terms baseline consisted of or included the Detexis system rather than the IMS. So that might have been a better way of saying that point.
In the next paragraph, you allude to the contributors, or what you refer to as the major contributors to the price increase of 699 million rand in the combat suite.
That's correct, yes.
Now, you refer at the end of that paragraph to a document. It is a memorandum. It's dated 30 June 1998. It is your DTI 0228, our RMY 44. Do you have the document before you?
Yes, I do.
That deals with the selection of the Tevitec CMS at a cost of about 350 million.
You just gather my wits about me. Yes, I think one mustn't infer that if I have reference documents that they only apply to what is said in the about these are documents to which I want to talk to address. So I think 228 addresses the context of the price contributors in general rather than the Tevitec system alone, but it certainly is still relevant.
Now, if you have regard to RMY 46, that is a document that provides the price breakdown. It is your DTI 0423 and our RMY 46. Does anything turn on that price breakdown at page 1021?
Sorry, I can't follow those page numbers. The documents that I have in front of me are my 228, 411, and 423.
I'm referring to 423, which contains the price breakdown.
Yes, okay, I need to address all of those documents. Maybe if I can do it in the order in which they appear. Otherwise, I'll confuse myself, and that's the last thing I need to do.
You can do that then.
Okay, I just want to do, I need to justify, although there's no burden of proof or onus of proof on me, I do need to justify the statements that I make as far as I can. I'm not making a commitment now to prove everything beyond a reasonable doubt, but I'm doing my best. Okay, if we come to, obviously I'm going to give you time now to get onto the right page. I'm on page 2 of 4 of this document, starting at implications for Project Citron.
That would be page 1012 of our bundle. that is on file 3, page 1012. You may proceed.
Yes, I'm going to start off with the heading that says implications for Project Citron, and they refer to acquisition costs. And I think this also emphasizes the point I'm making about price increases and how it got to the 3.9 and the 2.6 and the 2.9s, whatever. It says here quite graphically, and this document, as far as I know, is written by the project officer of both Project Suvex and Project Citron, then Captain Carmerman. And he says at point Roman numerals I, the acquisition cost of Project Citron will be increased by more than $1 billion if the currently specified local combat suites are replaced by astronomical more expensive foreign equipment of the same functionality, assuming the May 98 Rand exchange rate. And I've used the term, well, not quite, almost the same term, astronomical. Examples of this are the ADS C²R² combat management system at 95 million, quite where we were involved in things of C²R² ADS. Anyway, it was interesting that we were in the baseline somewhere along the line of providing a combat management system. I was unaware of that, unless of course it was always known that the TAVI-TAC combat system would have come in and our IMS would actually form part of it. So that's the only rationale I can think of right this second. But I think to put in perspective, of course there was no competition from the likes of Celsius Tech, although I know that they begged the German frigate consortium to allow competition. In fact, I met a senior executive of theirs in Cape Town who told me that they had a complete proposal sitting on the desks of the relevant Blom and Voss people in Hamburg. But we can also see the price there of 280 million. I come to, in my evidence document, the price that was paid for the French system was, like I've referred to, 350 million. I'm not sure whether it was eventually 350 million or 335 million, but it was a lot. First of all, a lot of money, and secondly, a lot more than Celsius Tech money, which was 280 million. But of course, it was 3 or 4 times more than what was originally being developed in South Africa, which is the topic of this whole letter, which is the South African technology development, where there could have been a combat management system at 95 million. Here again, the Kentron air defense missile was here priced at 150 million. I think I stated earlier that the price eventually was 330 million, I think. Anyway, that just shows the enormous amount of risk that was added on by whoever, I'm not sure. But certainly how cost-effective South African systems were. My company even has a tiny little involvement in the rolling airframe missile, RAMSIS, and I can tell you as an expert that the Kentron missile is a far more capable missile in terms of certainty of range, etc., than the RAM missile, which was being offered at 350. So it just shows the value for money of the South African systems. The electronic warfare system is shown here at 160 million. I'm pretty sure it's in the final costing is well over 200. Okay, anyway, it certainly puts in perspective of what I'm trying to say, that the prices that made up the 2.6 billion are extremely, extremely high of what could have been achieved in terms of the expectation, at least, that is being addressed right here in front of us.
Just in a different context, if you turn the page to our page 1013, you find a heading there that deals with strategic implications. Is that something that you want to talk to? The comments that are made there with regard to...
Well, actually, this unfortunately takes me back to the first page, but I have to put this in the context of that.
Proceed.
We're talking about paragraph 2 here, where it is stated where the current situation is addressed.
No, I was actually talking about page 3 of your document, or page 1013, on strategic implications.
Indeed, what I said is before I can address that, I have to introduce the context from the beginning of this letter was addressed on the first page, the section 2, current situation. That puts it in context. Okay, I'll read from that. The current situation is described as, due to the realities pertaining in the industry during the last 3 years, i.e. a virtual cessation of SA Navy capital project activities, many of the 16 companies, divisions involved in Project Suvis are literally reliant on its continuation for their survival until orders can be placed under Project Citron. All of the industry involved in Suvex are either small specialist companies or small specialist divisions of larger companies which cannot survive without continuity of orders, especially in the current climate of low business confidence which inhibits self-investment. In turn, however, all cost, schedule and logistic capability and IP planning, that's industrial participation, not intellectual property, for Project Citron assumes the continued survival of the local industry and the sourcing and support of the Corvette Combat Suite from them. Thus, a central pillar of the acquisition strategy for Project Citron is the assumption of a mainly local combat suite. B, the survival of local industries dependent on continuity of funding in fiscal year 98. C, from A and B above, Project Citron, as planned, is critically reliant on the continuation of Project Suvex. I think that is the correct context to take me to that point.
So that point appears in the following page, 1013, under paragraph B. It makes reference to, among others, unaffordable core capabilities, loss of knowledgeable buyer capabilities, and loss of control of critical force multiplying technologies.
Yes, indeed. Look, this takes me to many of the other points. Our self-investment in the IMS. I've mentioned that. It's the child that was fed for 7 to 8 years. It's the disintegration of the local industry. And I'm pleased to say that despite us not winning the IMS, we never disintegrated, but we very nearly came to doing so. But certainly at this stage, this is a fairly reasonable assessment of why we thought that our company had a legitimate expectation of being involved in not just the development, technology retention, whatever name one wants to keep it, in the supply contract for 4 corvettes, 4 frigates for Project Citron, based on our technology maturity, our prices were acceptable, But clearly, C squared, I squared, a year or so later was not that important to the continuation of the local capability of the South African naval defence electronics industry.
Is there any other relevant passage to your discussion on this document regarding the contributors to the price increases?
No, the only thing I need to say is the last thing I said was said sarcastically.
Perhaps if you turn to the next annexure, which is RMY 45, your DT 10411, there is a management briefing dated 23 April 1999, and that's a document that appears in that same file at page 1015.
Yes, I did mention that I talked about project control boards and presentations made there too. This one, as we can see, is Annexure A. So it's a management briefing, and as far as I remember, this was given to both the Naval Board as well as the Project Control Board. And it's an annexure probably of both, but I think I'm referring to the Project Control Board. And there's some relevant points that I would like to address here.
Could you just start with the first one?
Okay, and Combat Suite, which is point 2, still on the first page of this document, was fairly clear. I think hopefully I've traversed that well enough. Is initially largely overpriced. If I make an observation, eventually it was still overpriced. I can say that in the context of what is sitting here in brackets, the target was less than 2 billion, where it was ended up at 2.6 billion. So it obviously still has to be largely overpriced at the end, unless there were very good reasons for that jump of 700 million. This particular document refers to the Combat Suite, its status at February 99, and where it was quoted at 3.2 billion. I think I have addressed that, but whether it's in this document or others, it actually started at 3.9 billion. Just to show the government, the state's perception of where we were in this acquisition process, what I would have thought would have been formal at this stage, especially in terms of MODAC. Here it's stated that a seriously incomplete quote. It's difficult for me to reconcile myself with what I read here in terms of a formal acquisition process. Well, here is something I mentioned just in the previous point regarding the prices. The previous point in the previous letter of what is stated, the Kentron's missile, which is a pretty capable missile, but where the price inflation came from, I'm not quite sure, but I'm just reading what I see here. The Kentron's Mkhonto surface missile, previously having been quoted by Kentron, as far as I know, in those cost and risk audits, at 150 million in May 98. Obviously, that's where the May 98 came from. Were being quoted at 380 million. I think the final price might have come down to, I think I mentioned 320. So there obviously some risk was reduced there, but that's still a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. A graphic point regards the combat management system. In November 98, not even May 98, the price was 96 million. I've mentioned figures of 350 million and 335 million. Here it talks about 320 million. I mean, that's how much it cost us by going for a French system rather than the one that Altec Defence Systems was offering. And as far as I'm aware, that there was only a very minor, not very minor, a relatively minor lack of capability that was being offered there. Certainly not worth the difference between 96 million and 320 million, etc. Normally, etc. Prices padding due to unfamiliar contracting model. Now, to me, that's just unacceptable for a professional approach to providing best and final offers and whatever else. Now, we're talking about April now. Okay, here is the complete quote. March 99, under 4, complete quote at 3.9 billion. That's brought down by the exclusion of performance guarantee by ADS, bringing it down to 3.3. Now, that's a pretty fundamental statement. Quite where I'm meant to fit in my performance guarantee for the combat suite, for the entire combat suite of 3.3 billion, I'm not quite sure. So anyway, it's just, in fact, to be honest, it's confusing me of where all this stuff comes from. Then the next week, just a month later, we've now got down from 3.9 to 2.8. As I've said before, this was achieved in various means, but certainly cutting down in quantity of various systems, quality of systems, exclusions of nice-to-haves. At this stage, the IMS wasn't a nice-to-have, it was still on the baseline.
Now, on the issues which appear on this page 1017, these are matters that we have dealt with already in your evidence that relate to the reduction of the scope of work in order to try and achieve a price reduction. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't want to belabor the point, but maybe we can go down to the 5th page.
Is that the page that starts with platform second class?
It says item 7, combat suite, future path.
19. Right, I see paragraph 7.
To put in perspective, we bought this very expensive system, but for somebody at least, presuming that the Navy, Department of Defence, it is a painful loss of functionality. And despite the next point, the big bullet point down there where it says competitive quote for CS program management, integration, combat management system, this is not really practical. Now, I have to highlight that because that is, despite the directive from the Chief Executive Arms Corps for looking for alternative sources of supply and contracting models. Okay, the next point down is Arms Corps buys various elements of CS directly. I'm just wondering, it says feasible, but it doesn't carry on. But I would like to interrogate whether or not this is not in fact what happened in respect of part of, at least, the surface-to-surface missiles.
Apart from the issue you're raising now, is there anything else of significance on this document before we move to the next one, RMY 46?
I think we can go on to the next document.
That would be the price breakdown for week 12 proposal, corrected version, It appears as RMI 46, page 1021, which is your document. Right.
This is a many-page document. It looks like 10 pages. I think what it derives from is a spreadsheet of all the prices that were being recorded. In fact, if one looks at the documents, we can look at pricing it was done almost on a weekly basis. So they talk about pricing at week, in number of weeks per year, at week 10 or week whatever it is. As far as I can remember, the only spreadsheet that I have got in this form of 10 pages where it was attached to the request for best and final offer from ADS, which in itself was sent to us in response to a request for best and final offer from the DoD, from the Joint Project Team. And the point I want to make in this particular regard is here, and as far as I know, the prices of the various elements are recorded. And if I am correct in saying so, which I know is so small that I have to make sure that I'm referring to the correct spreadsheet. If I may just
You'll see that the spreadsheets are marked at the bottom of each schedule or spreadsheet, page 1 of 10. Now, page 1 of 10 is our page 1021, and it continues page 2 of 10, 1022, etc. You would see that in the various columns, there's something that deals with segment, element, acronyms, etc. Do you see that?
I know the spreadsheet quite well, but finding my way around a 10-sheet printout of it is not that easy. But I've come to a relevant part, which is the 6th sheet, page 6, but I just need to start somewhere else.
Can I just point out that the copies we have are completely illegible? You can't read.
Commissioner Musi, I'm struggling to read as well. We'll try and get the team to make A3 spreadsheets, perhaps that those might be a little more legible. Subject, of course, to the machine being in a functional working order.
I think let's proceed in the meantime, and we'll try and ask the staff to make us a slightly better copies.
Indeed, sir.
A4 landscape versions, and unfortunately my eyes are poor, and I can just make it out, not so much due to the size, but the quality of scanning and printing is not that great. Nevertheless, be that as it may, on the very first page, down the very left-hand side, I've added in, you can see on my version at least, I've done this specifically to indicate what I've put in, but just to be able to find my way around, is the indicator IMS. Are we all on the same page of that?
Are you on page 1 of that annexure?
Indeed, correct. Spreadsheet works is in, unfortunately, a matrix of maybe 2 by 5, which makes 10. So that in terms of, let's say, horizontal, there are 5 spreadsheets, and the second part of columns then comes from sheets 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why it's okay. So that if one put this together, it would be a big matrix of 10 spreadsheets, 5 down and 2 across. That's why to find the next part of the IMS, I have to go to spreadsheets or page 6. But it's important that I start off with the first page. I'm not going to spend too long over this. But on the first page, one can see at this particular point the IMS as in the system integration segment, and it's indicated in the column as contractor as CCII. Right. Okay. We also, as I think my evidence leader said, it's in respect of a price breakdown for week 12 proposal, corrected version, and it's got an American date right up at the top. Unfortunately, those people who don't fiddle with the spreadsheet settings get the American date. It certainly wasn't for the 5th of November 99, it was for the 11th of May 99. I think that's fairly clear by inference.
So that page 6 of that spreadsheet you're referring to is our page 1026.
Probably, but I don't want to go there, otherwise I'm going to lose my place on page 1. That's where I'm starting. Okay. Anyway, the information system and its companions, being the network interface cards, which I can just read here, and its bus tester, are indicated, both being supplied by CCII, and the amount, it looks like to me like 34 million. So they've obviously taken our quoted amounts and they've put this into various categories. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get is here is a detailed breakdown of our prices coming out of at least obviously this is our final BAFO was the 14th of May, and in fact that confirms my point. This was an addendum to the request for BAFO that we got on the 13th of May, and it was resulting from a JPT request for best and final offer. Okay, and that was attached to that. So here we are selected, and my view is not only if you are selected, but you disclose to all and sundry the prices. Now remember, and we've just actually talked about in the previous document, 16 different companies. Elsewhere's report, 18 different companies. At least 18 different companies would have been provided this request for best and final offer. So all of them are being sent the spreadsheet directly from ADS. That's why it's allocated and annotated right at the top, ADS. But the government, the state, the joint project team is disclosing our prices. And not just a bottom line price, details of our prices. Now, unfortunately, that is an unfair competitor. How unlawful it is, I don't know. But in my view, once you've gone this far in a acquisition process, and then it gets opened up to competition, it has to open up very, very serious questions about reasonableness and unfairness. In fact, it just cannot be. Once you've exposed a company's price, that's it. It would only be fair if our prices were so unreasonable at this stage that they didn't fit into the greater scheme of things. But why I've addressed these prices in the first page 1 here, is I'm trying to show that our IMS prices were indeed reasonable. If we go down to the next point, you come to CMS, and you also come, and that is allocated to ADS. You can see that in that column, and even the NDS at this stage, pre-BAFO. If you look at that column,
we have a suggestion to make. We want to adjourn for 15 minutes, and from there we come back until 6 o'clock. We want to try and see if we can finish this witness of time.
I'm quite happy to stay here till 6 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning, thank you. Any objection? There's an offer that the witness says that he can sit here until 6 o'clock the following morning. Can we adjourn and come back after 15 minutes and continue and see how far can we go? Thank you. We'll adjourn for 15 minutes. We'll come back after 15 minutes and we'll see how far can we go. Thank you.
Thank you.